John Wayne Gacy Jr. was born in Chicago, Illinois, the second of three children born to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robinson. John Wayne Gacy had a very tough childhood because he was overweight and unathletic. John had a very tough childhood and was abused by his father very frequently. He was beaten with a belt, a shoe, and even empty beer bottles. Many things led to John Wayne Gacy becoming a serial killer. His child abuse, being molested as a child, and working in a mortician's office throughout college. In August 1967, Gacy committed his first known sexual assault upon a teenage boy. The youth was a 15-year-old named Donald Voorhees. Gacy lured the youth to his house under the promise of showing Voorhees pornographic films. Gacy plied Voorhees with alcohol and persuaded the youth to perform oral sex upon him. Several other youths were sexually abused over the following months. In March 1968, Donald Voorhees reported to his father that Gacy had sexually assaulted him. Voorhees Sr. immediately informed the police, and Gacy was arrested and subsequently charged with oral sodomy in relation to Voorhees and the attempted assault of a 16-year-old named Edward Lynch. On May 10, 1968, Gacy was indicted of the sexual assault charges. He appeared before a judge on November 7th of the same year and pled not guilty. On December 8th, Gacy was sentenced to 10 years in maximum security prison in Anamosa State Penitentiary. Gacy was granted parole with 12 months probation on June 18, 1970, after serving only 18 months of his 10-year sentence. Upon his release, Gacy told friends and relatives that he would stay out of prison this time. This proved to not be the case less than a year later. On February 12, 1971, Gacy was charged with sexually assaulting a teenage boy. The youth claimed that Gacy had lured him into his car at Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal and driven him to his home, where he had attempted to force the youth into sex. The complaint was subsequently dismissed when the youth failed to appear in court. The Illinois Board of Parole did not learn of this incident, which violated his conditions of his parole, and 8 months later, in October 1971, Gacy's parole ended. The following month, records of Gacy's previous criminal convictions in Illinois were subsequently sealed. Gacy hid his arrest and molestations well from his friends and family. No one ever knew of any of them, and they assumed he was a very friendly, outgoing, community-based guy who even threw neighborhood parties. On January 2, 1972, Gacy picked up 15-year-old Timothy McCoy from Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal. Gacy took McCoy, who was traveling from Michigan to Omaha, on a sightseeing tour of Chicago, and then drove him to his home with the promise that he could spend the night and be driven back to the station in time to catch his bus. Gacy later said that he awoke the following morning to find McCoy standing in his bedroom doorway with a kitchen knife in his hand. Gacy leapt from his bed, and McCoy raised both arms in a gesture of surrender, tilting the knife upwards and accidentally cutting Gacy's forearm. Gacy had a scar on his arm to support this claim. Gacy twisted the knife from McCoy's wrist, banged his head against the bedroom wall, kicked him against the wardrobe, and walked toward him. McCoy then kicked him in the stomach, and Gacy grabbed the youth, wrestled him to the floor, and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest as he straddled him with his body. Gacy claimed he then went into the kitchen, saw an open carton of eggs and a slab of unsliced bacon on the kitchen table. McCoy had also set the table for two. He had walked into Gacy's room to wake him while absent-mindedly carrying the kitchen knife in his hand. Gacy subsequently buried McCoy in his crawlspace and later covered the youth's grave with a layer of concrete. It was in that killing that Gacy discovered that he loved murder. He was later quoted in an interview saying he felt totally drained and noticed he had experienced orgasm after he killed the youth. In the 1980s video, he added, "That's when I realized death was the ultimate thrill." It was at this point in his life that Gacy became aware of a Jolly Joker clown club whose members dressed up as clowns and would perform at fundraising events and parades in addition to voluntarily entertaining hospitalized children. By late 1972, Gacy had joined the Jolly Jokers and had created his own performance character, Pogo the Clown. Gacy had designed his own costumes and taught himself how to apply clown makeup. The sharp corners Gacy painted at the edges of his mouth are contrary to the rounded borders that professional clowns normally employ, so as not to scare children. Gacy later stated that the second time he killed was around January 1974. The victim was an unidentified teenage youth with medium brown curly hair, estimated to be aged between 14 and 18, whom Gacy strangled before stowing the youth's body in his closet prior to burial. Gacy later stated that the fluid leaked out of the youth's mouth and nose as he was stored in the closet, staining his carpet. As a result of this experience, Gacy later stated he regularly stuffed cloth rags or the victim's own underwear in their mouths to prevent a reoccurrence of this incident. This particular unidentified victim was buried about 15 feet from the barbecue pit in Gacy's backyard. Between 1976 and 1978, Gacy went on a long murder streak, starting when he abducted and murdered an 18-year-old youth named Daryl Sampson. Sampson was last seen alive in Chicago on April 16, 1976. 5 weeks later, on the afternoon of May 14th, a 15-year-old named Randall Raffett disappeared while walking home from Senn High School. The youth was gagged with a cloth, causing him to die of asphyxiation. Hours after Raffett had been abducted, a 14-year-old named Samuel Stapleton vanished as he walked to his home from his sister's apartment. Both youths were buried in the same grave in the crawl space. On June 3, 1976, Gacy killed a 17-year-old Lakeview youth named Michael Bonin. Bonin was strangled with a ligature and buried in the crawlspace. 10 days later, a 16-year-old uptown youth named William Carroll was murdered and buried directly beneath Gacy's kitchen. Gacy may have been the first of the 4 youths known to have been murdered between June 13th and August 6, 1976, and who were buried in a common grave located beneath Gacy's kitchen and laundry room. This common grave also held the body of a 5th estimated to have been killed after this date. 2 identified youths killed between June 13th and August 6th were aged 16 and 17 years old. The first 2 unidentified youths known to have been murdered between these dates is a youth with medium dark brown hair estimated to have been aged between 22 and 30 years old and between 5'1" and 5'6". This youth is also known to have had 2 missing upper front teeth at the time of disappearance, leading investigators to believe this particular victim most likely wore a denture. All that is known about the second unknown youth that was murdered between these dates is that he had dark brown hair, was estimated to have been aged between 15 and 19 years old, had sustained a fracture to his right clavicle several years prior to his murder, and that he was strangled to death. All of the rest of his murders went down in a similar fashion. Both identified and unidentified victims strangled or stabbed, followed by necrophilia. Between December 11th and December 21st, police made many leads in the Gacy case. They had linked all of the murders to John Wayne Gacy, and Gacy knew it and was scared. So, in the early hours of December 22nd, Gacy went to the police station and did an 8-hour confession with the police, in which he disclosed each of the murders and the location of each of the bodies. This led the police to go search for each of the bodies, and found most of them. Gacy was brought to trial February 6, 1980, charged with 33 murders. Gacy pled not guilty on many pleas. These included insanity and accidental deaths for all 33 murders, claiming that they were erotic asphyxiation and all consensual. After a month of trial, on March 13th, the jury deliberated for more than 2 hours before they returned with their verdict. Gacy was sentenced to death for 12 counts of murder, upon which the prosecution had sought the death penalty. An initial date of execution was set for June 2, 1980. John Wayne Gacy filed for appeals for 13 years, up until last year. His final death penalty was set for May 10, 1994, today.